So let's talk a little bit about breaking the patterns that keep you stuck. I think this is a worthy investigation, a worthy inquiry. Most human need for control doesn't actually create safety, it creates suppression. We unconsciously hide in habitual behaviours and unexamined patterns, particularly as ways of seeking control and avoiding discomfort, whether emotional, or existential. The illusion of control, the ways that we hide, the fear of what's beneath, and the path of liberation. In our attempts, in many ways, to maintain some sort of control, we avoid ourselves. We avoid what's underneath ourselves. We develop strategies, tactics, beliefs, thoughts, habits, addictions. All of these are kind of patterns that go around and around and around on a daily, on an hourly basis in order to buffer us somehow against what lurks underneath. But the human need for control doesn't actually create safety, it creates the illusion of safety. But actually what it does over time is create a kind of ongoing suppression of what's inside us, what's underneath us. And if we're not careful, that can become an all-consuming suppression. It can become like a volcano, and that volcano can erupt in small or big ways. That volcano, as I've seen in life and as I've observed, and I'm not the only one, obviously it's all out there, that suppression of what's underneath can be destructive. It can create illness, it can create depression, and of course it can create these toxic behaviours that we adopt, from the relatively mild to actually the extremely self-destructive, of addictions to things that provide a very good buffer against the harsh reality of our true experience of what lies beneath the surface, but actually ultimately have no, the only way to maintain that sense of control or buffering is to continue doing them. So the nature of addiction. The nature of addiction in many ways is you have to keep on doing it, even though the effect of it can get less and less over time. So you need to keep doing more and more. The sort of law of how addiction works, you have to increase the amount in order to compensate for the ever seeping in of the truth of things, of the pain. This is, not sustainable in many ways, right? What are the ways that people commonly hide? Over-intellectualizing. There's a lot of that happens, over-mentalizing everything, over-intellectualizing. It's, the spiritual world is full of over-intellectualizing as well as every other part of life, but it really happens in the spiritual arena as well. Emotional suppression, perfectionism and busyness, addictive behaviours, routines and rigidity. We're built on patterns. We've depending on really the kind of architecture or constellation that we're born into when we're young, and we in many ways don't have any control over that, and then depending on what happens as we're at the mercy of these forces that are largely beyond our control, and the compromise of our innocence and the abuse or the whatever happens to us creates a pattern, good, bad, or really, really bad, or ugly, or terrible, creates the pattern that we grow up with, that we call our personality. But a lot of times that personality is built on compensating factors of control and avoidance, of suppression of emotions, of strategies of survival, because we're clever like that, and we have to. We're built to a certain extent on survival, and the survival is not just a survival on the physical level of the organism, but it's also survival. That's where we get it mixed up a bit. Survival on the emotional level, on the psychological level, on the existential level. We develop strategies of ways of surviving on those energetic levels, and so we build these patterns around ourselves, and they serve us to a certain extent, and then they stop serving us, because actually they become increasingly suppressive, and we have, as the build-up goes on, as we continue to avoid how we really feel of what lies beneath the surface, so we continue to build up the load, if you like, and that ends up ultimately being an increasingly suppressive activity, so that by the time we get older, it can be at a threshold that either kills us, kills somebody else, puts us to sleep, makes us very, very ill, slips us into resignation and kind of depression, because by that stage we've become so, this avoidance has become so embedded in us that it's almost as if impossible. I don't think it's ever impossible myself. I don't like to keep the doors closed for people. I always like to keep the doors open. The doors of possibility need to stay kind of endlessly open, because if you close them, it's like, well, then what? Then what? But it does get tougher as you get older, I think, because they get ground in. The ruts of the avoidances get ground in more and more and more and more, which is why, in these, although crazy days, the information, the awareness, the insight, the encouragement, I think, the field of energy that one can tap into. I mean, it's all there. Whatever field of energy you want to tap into, you will find it somehow. From the very, very light through the internet to the very, very dark on the dark web. Whatever level you want to go to and feed yourself on or in whatever field of energy, you'll find it there. So if you want to focus on the darkness, you can focus on that if you want, and there'll be plenty of feedback that you get about it. If you want to focus on the political, you'll find it all out there. If you want to focus on the ascended masters and the higher dimensions of the fifth dimension of this and that, and you'll find it all out there. If you want to focus on the astrological, aspects to being alive at this time, you'll find it all out there. And so, that gives us great opportunity. We're not victims of the internet. The internet now is mostly, anyway, unless it gets, so heavily regulated, censored, that you can't, that what is actually fed back to you is controlled. Otherwise, you can find out what it means. So, and the reason I'm saying this is because, if one wants freedom, if one wants awakening, if one wants a kind of liberation, or just a deeper sense of oneself, then it's sort of implicit that we need to look at the patterns of avoidance, the patterns of addiction, the patterns of behavioral modification that we habitually employ in order to avoid ourselves. This is like fundamental. That's why I've done this video today, to go back to the fundamental. Because if we don't get some of the fundamentals right, nothing changes. And we're built on these patterns, but most of the patterns that we're built on are all patterns of avoidance. And while we're avoiding what lurks below, there's not any chance to really deepen into a more whole experience of union or love, or just a deeper sense of oneself. It doesn't have to be big and grand. I'm not talking about the big and grand here. I'm talking about something, that's actually excuse me, just softer. Just awareness of ourselves, a deeper understanding of why we're doing what we're doing. This came, just from the very word, the very first insight I had, which seems naive now, but I was lost in toxic drinking, an alcoholic, not extreme, but extreme enough to destroy my relationship and make me completely sick. And ultimately, I just really not very well, highly destructive. And then eventually, when my girlfriend, my wife at the time, said, "I'm going to leave you unless you do something about your drinking." And I'd avoided this all, for years. She gave me an ultimatum, which I was very grateful for eventually. And I went to see a counsellor. This was in London, in the very, very early 90s, I think. And this counsellor sat there and listened to my story, and I told her what had happened in my life, and I told her what was just the habits of drinking that I was going through, the cycle of heavy drinking that I would go through. And she started to point out to me that I was drinking it sounded like I was drinking for a reason. And it was not just the reason of loving drinking or wanting to get out of it or anything like that, but I was actually drinking to avoid the pain of the feeling of what had happened in my youth when I was a teenager, in the destruction of my family life. And that insight went into me like a bomb, like that went into me like a light bulb went on inside me. And I started to see, just in its very early rudimentary ways, that actually I was doing something to avoid something else. It was my first introduction to psychology in many ways. I mean, I feel a bit stupid about it now, but it's like, how else do we get insight? And that started me, because then that light bulb going on, well, it didn't change things immediately, because I was still heavily addicted to drinking and just wanted to drink to, you know, because it was a habit by that. It was an addiction by that time. But it did put the, you know, turn the light bulb on, and I couldn't avoid it from then on. I was like, wow. So I'm avoiding things. What am I avoiding? I asked myself. What am I avoiding? And I think that very question started in many ways the beginning of a very long unraveling, in my case, you know, an unraveling that continued for, well, it still continues. Unraveling never continues. I mean, never ends. Unraveling is always kind of going on, because it's the human tendency, the tendency of the self that still exists, to continue raveling. It just does that. That's its purpose in a way. And but it did start off the unraveling, and I think that's why now, you know, I speak of this patterning, that we patterning of avoidance, patterns that follow us around, the unconscious patterns of avoidance and desire and grievance and wounding, but mostly always in a way trying to protect the self from itself, always trying to avoid the raw feelings of what it is that we're trying to avoid. So what is it that's trying to be avoided? Because the avoidance, the equation, doesn't actually, in many ways, in my opinion, in my experience, the equation doesn't really make sense. Because in order to avoid what we don't want to feel, we create these patterns of behavior, whether they're emotional, whether they're drinking, whether they're eating, whether they're relational, you know, whether they're intellectual, you know, whatever they are, in order to avoid whatever it is that's down below, whatever hurts so much. But actually, the nature of that suppression is that each time we suppress what we truly feel, it builds up yet another little bit, another little bit, another little bit. And so as time goes on and we go through our 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, you know, you have to do more and more and more of the avoidance strategies in order to compensate. And there it is. That's what I said at the front of the video. And there it is, because actually, you know, that suppression gets more and more destructive as time goes on. So the pain of meeting what hurts is actually in the long term healthier and better for us than the constant avoidance of what hurts. Initially, and for a while, and I know this for myself, the pain of what hurts, that has to be revealed and felt again in some way, shape or form, can feel agonizing in many ways, you know, and difficult to get to. You know, that's why I liked, I don't know now, body work, you know, cathartic body work, release, fascia release, rebirthing, things to get the body, you know, to release whatever is stuck in the energetic, subtle energy body, not so subtle energy body, to actually, to actually start releasing the connection between the emotional and the physical. You need a proper, you know, body worker who can do that, who specializes in that, not just a massage, not just a spa, not just any of that stuff, but actually specialists who know what they're doing in terms of cathartic body, energy, emotional release. And that really, really does something, profound. And that's how, and it hurts for a while. Of course it hurts for really quite a long time. But I've said it before, and I say it again, the pain of release is better than the pain of suppression. There's no two ways about it. It just is. And there has to be a way through, and you try in baby steps, So that's what I'm talking about. Real freedom comes when we recognize and interrupt these patterns, not by force, but through awareness. Instead of trying to control life, we begin to allow life. The moment we stop running and turn toward the discomfort, we find that it is not as threatening as we once believed. Pattern interruption. That's the name of the game. This is good. This is a good thing for the human being that wants to loosen up a little bit. Bless you.